Good afternoon from Warsaw, but also good morning and good evening, and welcome to the launch, the online launch of UNESCO and the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights new publication addressing anti-Semitism in schools training curricula. My name is Kishan Manocha, and I serve as the head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department at ODIHR. And I will be acting as your master of ceremonies, your general host for this online launch. Before we commence, may I, on behalf of ODIHR and UNESCO, offer a warm appreciation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance for creating this space in the very busy online plenary for this launch event. Throughout this event, you will find in your chat function various important pieces of information that will guide you as we progress through the proceedings. You will also be able to ask questions using the Q&A, the question and answer function. When you do so, please indicate your name, your institutional affiliation, or profession as appropriate. This event is being streamed live on the OSCE's YouTube channel, and the recording of the event will be made available following the conclusion of today's proceedings. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you my dear colleague and friend, Katarzyna Garabkadze, who is the officer in charge and the first deputy director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. Katarzyna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Kishan, dear Director Giannini, Your Excellency, Ambassador Küchler, members of the Diplomatic Corps, dear institutional partners, professors and teachers, dear members of civil society and Jewish communities, dear participants. Welcome to the online launch of the publication addressing anti-Semitism in schools training curricula. This new 4-volume publication is another result of our continued efforts to address anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance in and through education. The publication was developed in partnership with UNESCO and with the expert support of the University College London Centre for Holocaust Education, and it was a part of ODIHR's project Turning Words into Action. This launch comes at a difficult time for humanity and a difficult time for Jewish communities. The global health crisis has created conditions for conspiracy theories to proliferate widely, often scapegoating already discriminated minority communities for the origin and spread of the virus. Such theories have particularly spread online, but many individuals and communities have suffered the burden of intolerance and discrimination also offline, including in the form of hate crimes against people and property, and that included places of worship. Our office, the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, has monitored this highly dangerous trend, and we have published our findings and recommendations to state authorities in a report on OSCE Human Dimension commitments and state responses to the COVID-19 pandemic, which you can find on our website. Jewish individuals and communities have been particularly impacted in this new reality. It is truly alarming to see anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, some of which use the language and imagery painfully resembling those of the Nazi era, including elements of Holocaust denial and distortion. And it is alarming to see how quickly they incubate and accelerate online. This is taking place in a context where Jewish people have all too often had to cope with abuse, vilification, and hate, both online and offline. Physical assaults, the destruction or vandalism of Jewish cemeteries, synagogues, and community buildings, and violent and deadly anti-Semitic attacks are unfortunately commonplace. The times we live in underscore the urgency to effectively prevent and address anti-Semitism, including in its new manifestations, as well as all forms of hate in all our societies. It is also an important moment to remind OSCE participating states of their commitments to combat anti-Semitism. In 2014, the participating states agreed to promote educational programs for combating anti-Semitism and provide young people with opportunities for human rights education, including on the subject of anti-Semitism. So the curricula that we launched today can assist educators in contributing to making this commitment a reality in all OSCE participating states. Although the circumstances are truly disheartening, we are actually very encouraged whenever we have an opportunity to speak directly with young people. I recently participated in a discussion about human rights and democracy with a group of young people who were very committed to their aspirations to build a more equal and more tolerant world. If we can reach children and youth when they are still developing their views and understanding of the world, we can instill a lifelong commitment to inclusion and respect for diversity. Educators are uniquely placed to do this. However, their success depends on the knowledge and commitment to perform this crucial task. It also depends on the opportunities educators have to build the knowledge needed and on the existing frameworks that can support and sustain such commitment. The publication we are launching today promotes the positive values of human rights, global citizenship education, and gender equality. It aims to support teachers and school directors to become effective in creating a school ethos and environment where anti-Semitism is prevented and to adequately deal with it when it occurs. It also provides tools to tackle discrimination in schools more broadly, providing suggestions for how to adapt the content to other forms of prejudice. We hope that it will help make schools safer and more inclusive spaces for Jewish and all other students. We are very glad to organize this event within the wider framework of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance plenary, and I would like to thank IRA for their support. This partnership significantly enhances our common efforts to counter anti-Semitism in the OSCE region. I would also like to warmly welcome our panelists and speakers today, who bring immense expertise, experience, and insight to the virtual table. We are grateful for your support and commitment, and the inspiration that your work provides to our own efforts to counter anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it occurs. I would like to wish us all a fruitful and enriching event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katarzyna, for that very warm message of welcome and introduction. I note particularly the point you make that, however disheartening the scene, we can and should be encouraged by the positive ways in which young people respond to opportunities to think about their role in building more inclusive societies grounded in respect for diversity and human rights. So thank you very much again for those words. It gives me great pleasure now to introduce virtually a recorded message from the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, Stefania Giannini.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome you to the launch of our latest publication of Addressing Anti-Semitism Through Education, jointly published by UNESCO and the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. At the outset, I wish to thank our partners at the Office for the fruitful cooperation we have joined in the past years. Once again, it's yielding very concrete and necessary outcomes, especially now. Special thanks go also to the University College London Centre for Holocaust Education for their outstanding work in preparing this important publication. I express also my gratitude to the German presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance for hosting this launch event in the context of the Europe plenary meeting. Well, our new curriculum will support teachers, trainers, and school directors in preventing and addressing anti-Semitism through education and in educational environments. Investing in such education is more urgent than ever. With rising misinformation, hate speech, violent extremism, Jewish communities face increasing levels of threats and violence, unfortunately. The international community cannot stand by. Anti-Semitism cultivates ideologies anchored in hate. It feeds conspiracy theories and violent extremist messages, online and offline. It builds on Holocaust denial and on Holocaust distortion somehow, when the historical record is manipulated to advance nationalist agendas. It fosters on hatred of Israel when the situation in the Middle East is utilized to vilify and discriminate against Jews. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has further accelerated many things and accelerated this concerning trend as well. Jews have been blamed for the spread of the virus. Anti-Semitic tropes have been used to fuel mistrust in leadership and science. But anti-Semitism doesn't stop in front of school gates, let me say clearly. Teachers and school directors need to be prepared to respond to it and to prevent it. It's part of our responsibility to ensure that schools are safe and inclusive spaces for all learners, free of discrimination and prejudice. This is why education is so relevant, so important, to help young people recognize and confront anti-Semitism when they say it, to sharpen their critical thinking, to promote constructive political ethical engagement in their society, to discriminate and distinguish between truth and fake. UNESCO is deeply committed to this task. In 2019, with our partners at OIDR, and with cooperation from the World Jewish Congress and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we train policymakers from over 60 countries. We are now developing an online course for educators to serve as a basis, as a ground for further regional and national capacity building workshops. We have just launched also within the UN, and thanks to the support of the World Jewish Congress, a global mapping of Holocaust denial and distortion on social media. Together with the European Commission and Twitter, we have launched a global communications campaign to counter conspiracy theories with a focus on anti-Semitism. We are now developing a method for teachers to debunk conspiracy theories as well. While our new framework curricula will build the confidence, the trust, and the capacity of pre-service teachers to prevent and address prejudice and hate while promoting global citizenship and human rights. Like all forms of intolerance and discrimination, anti-Semitism must be addressed heads-on to safeguard the human rights and dignity of all. Well, we know that education alone cannot prevent someone from committing a hate crime. But education can contribute really to a climate in which tolerance, discrimination are no longer accepted and actively rejected. It's my deep conviction that our new publication will contribute to this essential goal, and this is our mission together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Director General Giannini. Director General Giannini has reminded us of the incredibly powerful role that education can play in building the capacity of young people, of students, to address, to recognize anti-Semitism. the tools, critical thinking among them to defeat this terrible scourge, which we have heard former Assistant Director General Giannini has risen, if you like, during the course of this global pandemic. I would like to, on behalf of ODIHR, place not a star appreciation and gratitude to Stefania Giannini for her own personal contribution to the ongoing efforts to address anti-Semitism in the school environment, but to UNESCO generally for their cooperation in developing the curricula, and for, of course, the great efforts they've made over many, many years to address the phenomenon of anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance through educational processes. We will now shortly have the recorded message of Ambassador Michaela Kuchler, who is the current chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Should be handing over now to the recorded message. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, in January of this year, Edith Bruck, an Italian author, film director, and Holocaust survivor of Hungarian descent, addressed 35 ministers and other high governmental representatives of IHRA member countries. When she finished, the room was filled with a heavy, almost tangible silence. In her address, Miss Bruck, now 88 years of age, explained why she still visits schools to speak about her suffering, the loss of loved ones, the horrors she endured in different concentration and death camps, and on death marches. She told the ministers how she is unable to sleep the night before she talks to students. And she told them that she is increasingly afraid because of the incidents of hate, anti-Semitism, and racism she sees erupting all over Europe and beyond. She is afraid that it can happen again. Edith Bruck believes that it is imperative to educate the young, to give them the tools to think critically, to explain the values of democratic institutions, of minority protection, and of human rights. And, I would add, to let them also experience these values in their own lives. As chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, I share this belief. That is why I wholeheartedly commend ODIHR and UNESCO for the publication of training curricula addressing anti-Semitism in schools. I particularly welcome this publication as a practical follow-up to the guidelines for policymakers ODIHR and UNESCO published in 2018. It complements the IHRA's recommendations for teaching and learning about the Holocaust, adopted in December 2019. Guidelines for decision makers are needed, but equally needed is concrete support for practitioners and teachers. This is exactly what this new publication aims for. The IHRA, ODIHR, and UNESCO are partners on many levels. I am convinced that our organizations must strengthen our efforts to fight anti-Semitism, Roma discrimination, and other forms of racism at its core. One of the best ways to do so is to provide teachers with practical tools. But we also need to be able to identify these phenomena when we come across them. Therefore, I encourage the use of the IHRA's working definition of anti-Semitism and also of the newly adopted working definition of anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma discrimination as instruments to educate and to spark debate, We all know anti-Semitism to be an age-old form of discrimination that has many faces. The current pandemic and the eruptions of conspiracy myths show once again that Jews are pointed out as scapegoats by those who spread hate. We must stand together to fight this. We must speak out, and we must empower others to do so. And it is education that must form the cornerstone of our efforts. Thank you very much.
We are most grateful to Ambassador Curricula for that message, for her personal support, and again to thank Ira for this opportunity to launch these training curricula in the margins of this current online plenary. Ambassador Curricula again emphasized the critical role of education, and also reminded us, of course, that anti-Semitism has many faces, and we've seen manifestations of this in this regard during the pandemic, of course, and over recent years. And the educational process needs to be capable and able to address this in the education that it imparts, of course, to students. And this set of curricula will, of course, play a very important role in that regard through the training of teachers and school directors, about which we will now hear a lot more. So to move on to the next segment of this event, panel discussion on the importance of education to address anti-Semitism. We will hear from distinguished experts on the contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism and of the need to effectively address anti-Semitism through educational processes. I'm very pleased to introduce as the moderator of this panel discussion, Stephen Smith. Dr. Smith is the Finchie Vertebi Endowed Executive Director of the University of Southern California Shoah Foundation and the chairholder of the UNESCO Chair on Genocide Education. So Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kishan, and good morning from Los Angeles, and good evening to all of you in Europe today. Thank you for being here. And I want to pay particular thanks to the organizations that have convened us. OSCE, ODIHR, UNESCO, IRA, how important that international organizations come together on this issue, which is an international scourge that we are facing today, to provide the support that teachers need to tackle this in their classrooms. So to help us to navigate this, we have three experts joining us who are part of the global work that's going on to educate our future generations. I'm pleased to introduce to you today our panel. First of all, we're joined by Maram Stern. Maram is the Executive Vice President of the World Jewish Congress. Welcome, Maram. We also have Sharon Nazarian, also from Los Angeles, here with on the West Coast of America. Sharon is the Senior Vice President of International Affairs at the Anti-Defamation League. Welcome, Sharon. We also have Stuart Foster in London, Executive Director for the Centre of Holocaust Education at the University College London. Welcome to all of you. So part of our conversation is going to be, first of all, we'll do a round robin set of questions to each of you that I'd like to pose and have each of you answer, so we get your different perspectives from the different organizations that you work with. And first of all, I'd like to turn to the question of what you're facing specifically, what the assessment is that you have of anti-Semitism in your work today, and why that deserves specific attention in education. And maybe I'll turn to you first, Maram.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you again after we did not see each other for quite a while.
Likewise, likewise.
It's nice. Let me first thank also UNESCO for organizing, for being a leader in this educational project. It is important. Education is important. Education is very important, and education is extremely important. Then let me tell you, there's no experts. On anti-Semitism, you can't be an expert because anti-Semitism changes by the hour, by the minute. What is anti-Semitic today is not going to be tomorrow, or what was anti-Semitic yesterday is not anti-Semitic today, or it's not seen as anti-Semitic. But at the end of the day, whenever you express hatred against Jews in every form, it is unacceptable. Now, education is important, as I said, but education starts already, unfortunately, earlier. Education starts really when a kid is growing up. And something on which I'm bothered at the moment are the platforms, which I'm not an expert in, but are platforms like TikTok or others, where kids by the age of 7 already starting to play with their mobile phones and seeing mockery. For me, at the moment, mockery is much more dangerous than anything else, because mockery is something which kids takes in himself without realizing what this kid is even seeing, watching, doing, and then continuing to give it over to his friends. And this is where I would like to push, is that we stop this mockery, that we find a way how to stop it. And on this is my call on the platforms, on all the new platforms, just to stop it. Mockery is unacceptable. And not only towards Jews, mockery in general towards minorities or towards other groups are not acceptable. And this is where I'm asking UNESCO, where I'm asking the politician to be much, much tougher. A platform cannot allow that kids watch whatever they are seeing on their platform. And this is where we have to start. And then, of course, comes on the education, and to which I'm very thankful to UNESCO and to ODIHR for all the efforts. But we have to start even earlier than the normal school. And this is where is my appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Maram. So I think we're saying that this curriculum is really important from a formal perspective, but there are many informal ways that we need to address anti-Semitism in our society. Sharon, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for inviting ADL to participate in this important event. As we all know, anti-Semitism is really not about Jews. It's a symptom of a sick society projecting its fears, anxieties, trepidations onto the Jewish community. So anti-Semitism is not merely a problem for the Jewish people, but it's a canary in the coal mine as indicators of metastasizing social maladies, erosion of democratic principles and norms, assault on civil liberties, press freedom, democratic institutions, rise in populism, which is a huge issue right now in the US and around the world, proliferation of xenophobia, bigotry, various other forms of social intolerance. So when we see in the US year-over-year growth of anti-Semitic incidents over the last 6 years, culminating the highest number of such incidents in 2019, this should give everyone pause, and not just the Jewish community. And we can extrapolate this to the rest of the world as well. And we know that education is one of the most reliable methods to mitigate anti-Semitic beliefs and attitudes. We at ADL conduct a Global 100 polling, which last time we did, it showed an inverse correlation between the education and anti-Semitic attitudes nearly everywhere around the world, with the exception of the Middle East. And we know that in the Middle East, anti-Semitic attitudes are pervasive in the education system, so that's where it doesn't work there. Humans tend to fill the void of what they don't know or understand about a people, their language, their religion, their culture, their traditions, with all their fears and anxieties. Conversely, education that fills those voids with knowledge, fosters familiarity with an understanding of the Jewish people, their history, religion, culture, etc., can really help build social immunity against anti-Semitism by making people less susceptible to anti-Semitic messaging. On a final note, I'd really like to congratulate ODIHR and UNESCO on the anti-Semitism curriculum that's being launched today. ADL is especially appreciative that the curriculum is intersectional and situates anti-Semitism within a matrix of intersecting forms of oppression and highlighting its connection to other forms. This time is also recognizes that anti-Semitism is distinct from other forms like racism or sexism, but the framework, it primes educators not only to be teachers about anti-Semitism, but also to be advocates and change agents in their schools and communities. And this is truly critical at this moment. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Sharon. I want to also highlight for our audience that in addition to the work that ADL has done with its international polling, you're doing really excellent work through your Never Is Now conference, which attracts thousands of people from across the US to address the growth of anti-Semitism in the US. And thank you to all your colleagues for doing that on our behalf. Stuart, at University College London, you've been very busy. I've been reading the curriculum, and congratulations on the amazing work you've been doing. We've already heard from our first two panelists that that anti-Semitism is endemic right across society. So why does education matter in this context? What difference can it make?
Yes, well, you won't be surprised, Stephen, for me to say that we work directly in teacher education in particular. And I think education has a vital role to play, as all our speakers have said. But I think teacher education is a focus that we haven't spent enough time, enough energy on, because educating young teachers and beginning teachers is absolutely critical, because these are the people that are going to engage with our young people, and having those skills and those abilities and those dispositions to impact young people's understanding of these crucial issues is immeasurable in its importance. And obviously, colleagues later will be talking about these programs, these initiatives that we've been developing. I think one of the things I think that Maram said just now is that about young people. I mean, young people, as we know, we're not born with prejudice. We're not born with dispositions to dislike people, with hatreds and so on. This is something we cultivate in our interactions with society. And I think education must be a force for good in this process, because there's so many negative forces out there. I mean, we've rehearsed them already. Some of the research that's been going on worldwide, nationally and internationally, says this is a really, really serious problem and a growing problem. But I think one of the things that's heartening is that education could be a positive force. And I think what our challenge is to help young people develop in age-appropriate ways to be more judicious, more critical, more empathetic, more caring, and also to be able to be more resilient, to stand up to some of these issues that are really poisoning our democratic environment. Because not only do we want young people to understand that these things are wrong and problematic, but we want to encourage them to think actively about how they can address them in a variety of ways. And I think this is the work that we've been doing at UCL Centre for Holocaust Education. We were working with teachers to develop strategies, pedagogical strategies, approaches. And I think this comes out through these materials. It's absolutely critical work. I know I look about 25. I've actually been in education for 40 years. You'll probably be surprised by that. But I absolutely firmly believe in the power of education to be transformative. And to help people, as is often said, not what to think, but how to think, how to be critical in their thinking, how to challenge the kind of ugly rhetoric and the actions that are in our society. So I think it's really important, and building that resilience is also key to this.
Well, I'm glad you still feel 25, Stuart, but you don't look it, I'm afraid. But I want to just go now back to Maram. Maram, we're living in a period of pandemic that none of us could have anticipated, and you're a global organization, the World Jewish Congress. How have you seen the conspiracy theories and the fear and the anxiety manifesting itself in anti-Semitism across the world through the lens of World Jewish Congress?
It's quite simple. It's a fault of the Jews. Let's be very... If you follow daily politics, if you watch less sophisticated political reportage, which I'm doing all day long, I've always a TV in my background. If you follow what is happening on the street, not in the higher echelon of society, on the street, people are saying, yeah, Bill Gates is a Jew, which is not true, but it's his fault, yeah. Mark Zuckerberg is a Jew, he's promoting it. This is for his good. So there is a lack of understanding really what is happening. And it's always easy to say it's a fault of the Jew. It is very common. And this is in Europe, it's the most common thing when you put a microphone in front of somebody on the street and you start a little bit of discussion with him, he or she will tell you, it's the Jews who are bringing it. It's simple, it's primitive, but it works. And then, of course, it repeats. Yeah, because once you have a microphone of somebody and he says or she said is a Jew, and then you have a second person joining, oh yes, and then you have a third person, and suddenly this becomes a fact that it's a fault of the Jews that we have a coronavirus.
Yeah, you know, this time is a very difficult one. And one of the things that we're seeing is it's very difficult for people to even recognize or identify anti-Semitism because it's so ingrained in the culture. Sharon, in terms of what the ADL does, I know that you're working extremely hard to enable people to recognize anti-Semitism for what it is. How do we use education to do that, to sort of name it, shame it, understand it more deeply as the phenomenon that it is?
Obviously, starting with understanding it is very important. You know, anti-Semitism is really a function of identifying the locus of various social ills, calamities, or crises among the Jewish people, whether it's economic depression, it's wars, it's pandemics. So the proliferation of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories around the COVID pandemic is really not a new phenomenon, Stephen. We know centuries ago, Jewish people were blamed for spreading contagion through poisoning wells, leading to epidemics that killed roughly half of the European population. We know in the 1930s, Nazis blamed and likened Jews to vermin and characterized Jews as a contagion. In the 50s, Stalin's Soviet Union alleged a doctor's plot, which charged that leading experts charged with protecting public health were actually part of a conspiracy to do public harm. So none of this is new. And I can also add that a result of a recently released publication by the Journal of Psychological Medicine, last Friday, in fact, they released a survey of 2,500 adults who were representative of the English population according to age, gender, region, income, and their attitudes toward government narrative on coronavirus and related conspiracy theories. And it showed that those who were presented with a question saying, quote, Jews have created the virus to collapse the economy for financial gain, unquote. 5.3% of the interviews agreed a little bit, 6.8% agreed moderately, and 4.6% agreed a lot. So what we can see is that if a person blames Jews, they're more likely to blame Muslims. They're more likely to blame Bill Gates and the pharmaceutical companies. What we're observing is essentially a conspiracy mentality, a way of seeing the world that is marked by antipathy to officials, to mainstream accounts, to those in higher status position. So this is very dangerous, and no coincidence that, as you say, in the US, there's a proliferation of conspiracy theories, whether it's anti-masking, Israel-related COVID conspiracies, QAnon. And education becomes a very important part of debunking some of these theories, whether it's through the media and taking, ideas such as QAnon now has become a huge phenomenon in the US, really taking them apart and showing the fallacies behind it, but also understanding this conspiracy mentality that I referenced. We have to understand what are the social ills that our communities are facing today and what's leading to these. Essentially, anti-Semitism becomes the snake oil for these various problems and pandemics. So we have to make sure that propensity towards conspiracy mindedness is taken away and we go to the bottom roots of the societal problems that lead to such mentalities.
Yeah, thank you, Mara. In terms of the Jewish communities that you are so closely associated to, obviously we're talking about anti-Semitism here as a phenomenon, as if it didn't affect real people. And of course it does on a daily basis. For all those sort of young people, Jewish people who are in school, and for those who, Jewish communities that feel under attack, in what ways do you think this sort of mainstreaming of education around anti-Semitism can help those communities in this situation?
Again, education is crucial, is the most important thing. And this we have to start as early as possible, to educate, even to show that the Jewish kid is the same as a non-Jewish kid. Yeah, the education is important, but what we are talking here is already a higher advanced. The problem is on the basics. The problem is much lower. We are talking about people who are already thinking about it. we are talking here about schools, about universities, about academics. We are already speaking in a sphere which is not the street. And the problem at the moment with this coronavirus, even more, it's the street. And are the youngster who are watching, who are all day long are watching the different platforms or are playing on it. So we are talking about two levels. We are talking about the more educated level, which we need to educate, but we also have not to forget and to educate the youngster. And this is a problem. And the problem is that the kid in a school doesn't feel comfortable to be Jewish. And this, we have to find a way to avoid this, to overcome this, that every kid should feel as secure as possible in his school, in his class.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really impressive about this curriculum, Stuart, is the fact that you have started at the primary level, which is really great. Could you just talk about the decision to do that? Because Mariam's highlighted this a couple of times now, that it starts very young. Why do we have a specific part of this curriculum for primary school children?
Yeah, I think the issue of primary school education is really important. As we say, young people develop their worldview from an extremely young age. And I think it's important that we have young people think about, reflect on other people's experiences, because there's no age at which you can't start to think about how does another person feel about a certain situation or a reaction to a certain attitude, whether it's name calling, whether it's anti-Semitic remarks or racist comments. I mean, young people at the earliest age should start to think about the effect and impact they have on people. So I think at a very basic level, developing empathetic attitudes, caring attitudes with young people is really important. And I think that at primary level, we can start to do that. We can also start to tell human stories about people who've been victimed and persecuted, and trying to get young people to empathize, to care about individuals and what's happened to them, and try and understand, explain why those things occur. And that obviously is an entrance into issues such as the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. But of course, we have to be careful, don't we, with the Holocaust? I mean, it's deeply traumatic history, and I'm not suggesting that that all aspects of it should be taught in the primary school. And I think we're very careful about that in how we think through these things. But certainly about attitudes to others, about perspective taking, about human stories and human interactions, and just basic principles that we can develop in young people to actually be critical about and think about other people's ideas and experiences is actually fundamental. So starting at the youngest age with some basic elementary aspects of those things, and then building and developing through to secondary school and beyond, I think that's really important. And also I just want to pick up on what Sharon said earlier. I mean, I think this sense of education has a massive role to play in having students think about, how do we know what's true? How do we assess, on what evidence base do we assess with something is factual or correct? And I think we need to provide young people with those critical thinking skills in a range of ways, very specific to anti-Semitism, but in all range of ways, because this is becoming a real problem for us in the 21st century, this issue of misinformation and conspiracy theories. And we've got to really find ways as educators to address this. And to have young people think about, what's the provenance of this source of information? What other sources corroborate it? How do I know the context in which this was written? Who authored it? For what reason? I mean, I think we need to really work with young people and with teachers in developing these important civic and critical skills in society. I think it's absolutely fundamental. And those skills can be begun in the primary level, for no question, that we can begin to help young people adjudicate between different truth claims at a very young age, and we can do it very successfully.
Thank you, Stuart. Sharon, in the few minutes we've got left, I see there are a number of questions that have come in. I just wanted to address a few of them. There is a question from Maria Magdisi about countries that don't have a relationship with Israel and that may see Israel negatively. We have seen generally a rise in anti-Zionism as a form of anti-Semitism. How do we address that, both in a collective and social way, as well as in an educational way, do you think?
I mean, we can see in US campuses, especially and in progressive spaces, this is really showing up, where Jewish students are essentially asked to step away from the social justice movements and asked to check their Zionism, if we can say, at the door. And this is a huge challenge for Jewish students on US campuses today. And the way to do that is we are empowering Jewish students around the US to first understand that criticism of Israeli policy is not anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. So we have to create a space that criticism of Israel is allowed, just like we criticize any government and any policy. But when you step over the line and talk about the legitimate rights of the Jewish people to their own nation, to their own homeland, if you deny such rights, there are very clear guardrails around where something language becomes anti-Semitic. And therefore, now taking this notion of Palestinian rights and taking this notion of what do we do with Israel's policies and putting on all the Jewish people around the world, holding Jewish communities hostage essentially to the policies of Israeli government, it is anti-Semitic. And therefore separating those notions and creating space where Jews around the world, whether they're in Chile or they're in Los Angeles or they're in Belgium, in Brussels, they as Jews have a right to their own identity as Jews and not to be beholden to policies or criticism of policies of Israeli government. But at the same time, we as a Jewish people have a right to our nation and nationhood. And so separating some of these very multi-layered complicating factors that have just kind of come on top of one another and essentially hijack the social justice and progressive spaces and leave no room for Jewish students, especially as we see in the US, to be able to wear their kippah, wear their Magen David necklaces, and to show their Jewish identity in the way that they feel comfortable. So this is a real danger facing American students today, and we need to really work on that with university administrators, with faculty. Faculty are essentially sometimes part of the problem where they bring their own ideologies into the classroom. And administrators, university presidents have to be really aware of that. And we at ADL are very, working very closely with university administrators to say, when a professor refuses to write a letter of recommendation for a student who wants to attend an Israeli university, that is anti-Semitic. So we are educating university officials about where are those lines when criticism of Israel crosses into anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm seeing a lot of really good questions coming in. Just want to assure everybody, even if we don't get to them all right now, because I've got one more for Maram and one more for Stuart, we will, after we go off this panel, we'll continue to answer some of those to you directly, and I'll encourage the panelists to do that. Antonella Tiburzi is asking Maram about the fact that anti-Semitism comes from ignorancy and the fact that we don't teach about the history of the Jews in Europe. Before we teach you about the Shoah. So could you just talk a little bit about that and how teaching about Jewish life and culture might help us to minimize acts of anti-Semitism in the future?
For me, it's quite simple, just by showing that a Jewish kid, a Jewish student, is the same as a non-Jewish kid or student. That he or she goes perhaps to synagogue, that he or she eats perhaps challah on Friday night. That's a difference, but otherwise, he or she is as good in school, he or she is as good in sport as anyone else. And somehow we have to show and to educate that there's no difference between a Jewish kid and a non-Jewish kid. And there's something which, in my experience, is missing. Somehow when you say, and I see it myself, when I say, I'm a Jew, wow, I did not imagine you look like this. So there is something in educational which we have to bring to the person, is that we are similar, that we both all have a nose and 2 ears and 2 eyes. It sounds very simple, but this is what is missing. Somehow there's still this myth around of Jews being not the same as non-Jews.
Thank you, Maram. Stuart, I'm seeing a set of questions that relate to why teach about anti-Semitism specifically. Daniel Goldhagen's asking, how does that fit in terms of how we teach about discrimination and xenophobia? Seifi Kenan's asking about, how this fits to finding a common language across cultures and traditions, specifically to eradicate anti-Semitism. But I think it's playing into this question of where does this fit in the panoply of discriminations that we face in the world today, and why do we need to single this out for education specifically?
Well, clearly there are close relationships between racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and so on. And I think it's important to draw on those relationships. But of course, anti-Semitism, as the guidelines and the documents suggest in what we're launching here today, that there are some distinctive areas where anti-Semitism needs more attention. And I think this is probably the first time we've really spent a concerted effort, international effort with OSCE, with UNESCO, with IRA, to actually, with ODIHR, to actually look at the issue of anti-Semitism in an educational framework in this way. And so I think it's really important that we have this focus. But that is not to say that this doesn't have echoes and relationships with other racisms and other issues, because of course it does. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think they're interwoven. And there's a little bit of a danger of separating them out too much, that you're saying, well, you're ignoring this. It's not. It's about including all those things. But anti-Semitism definitely has its own history and its own preconditions. I mean, the question that Maram spoke to there about the ordinariness of life, we found in our research with teachers in England that only 25% of teachers taught about pre-war Jewish life, for example, and very few teachers taught about anti-Semitism and the long history of anti-Semitism. So what we've done in our programs is spent much more attention to that background knowledge and that information, so that teachers have that grounding and they're able to communicate that to young people. The sort of ordinariness, the diversity of life. Most young people, for example, did not appreciate that 9.5 million Jews lived in Europe before the Holocaust, that communities existed that were 2,000 years old. And these were ordinary people doing ordinary lives in a diverse range of ways. So, I mean, I think anti-Semitism and understanding that this long history of anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism is really important. But again, these conditions are also have echoes of other racisms.
Well, thank you, Professor Stuart Foster, Dr. Sharon Azarian, and Maram Stern. Thank you for all that you do through your organizations, ADL, World Jewish Congress, University College London. It's wonderful to see you all at a distance. And thank you for your insights today, and congratulations to everybody for this amazing new curriculum. There are many links in the chat. Please follow those links, learn about these organizations and follow what they do and support them, because this is really important work they're doing together. And I'm sending it back to you, Kishan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I'm sure everyone would agree with it. That was a fascinating panel discussion. So immense thanks to Maram, to Sharon and Stuart for your insights. I was particularly struck, well, by your presentation of the drivers of contemporary anti-Semitism, but also the points around the need to address intolerance, discrimination, anti-Semitism when children are at primary school age, when they're young, when they have the capacity to understand, to recognize, to identify, to think. And this critical thinking skill, the point that Stuart made around critical thinking and civic skills, and how they can be honed and nurtured to not just think in inclusive terms, but also to address, to debunk the conspiracy theories, the disinformation, the misinformation, to distinguish what is true from what is false. So much needed, because it is so prevalent, so sadly, regrettably, and disturbingly prevalent in our world today. So thank you all very, very much for an incredibly fruitful and insightful discussion and series of presentations. So we now move on to the next segment, which will take us into the practical realm, if you like. What does this framework curricula actually do? How are they constructed? Why are they constructed the way they are? And how they can be used and implemented with school directors and with teachers. As has been mentioned, the training curricula have been created with the great support of University College London, University College London Centre for Holocaust Education. And so in this section of the event, we have the pleasure and honour to have with us Ruth Ann Lenger, who's Associate Professor and Programme Director at UCL's Centre for Holocaust Education, and Arthur Chapman, who is Associate Professor in History Education at UCL's Institute for Education. They both led the development of the curricula and will present it today. Their knowledge, their expertise, and that of their team, as well as the leadership of Stuart Foster, have been crucial in creating this, as we've heard, rather unique, incredible material. This material has also benefited from the expertise and knowledge of a expert advisory board. We're delighted that a number of the members of the expert advisory board have joined us virtually for this launch to see the fruit of their hard work as well. And we're most grateful to them for that. And you'll find their names acknowledged in the material, in the curricula. The development, the shaping of the curricula has also benefited from a series of consultations with educational stakeholders across the OSCE region, run as part of the Words into Action to Combat Anti-Semitism Project's education component. And now to give you an idea of the process that was undertaken, we will watch together a short video that was first produced and launched 2 years ago that puts this process in its context. So we'll now watch this.
Schools, and in particular teachers, they play a very important role in shaping the future society. And this is very important now when we see that more hate message and anti-Semitism disseminated through the internet. And the school can address this and give the children the tools that they need.
We're working to better equip educators and the public on how to discuss issues related to anti-Semitism, intolerance, and non-discrimination.
First of all, the politicians should be focused on prevention. So think at schools that you teach children what anti-Semitism is and why it's not okay.
If Jews are at risk, then everyone else who's a minority is at risk. If Jews are threatened, then everyone else who is slightly different or overtly different is threatened.
What audio can do is to provide information about best practice in the various participating states.
First and foremost, at the moment, we are doing research.
How can we look at also the existing educational practices?
We are having focus groups in a number of countries within the OSCE region to identify obstacles that educational professionals face when teaching about anti-Semitism in the classroom. These findings will feed into the development of a policy guideline.
UNESCO is very happy to work with OSCE on a policy guide. We think it will be a very, very useful tool for policymakers, which we're also complementing with materials for teachers to implement the work on the ground.
The hope is that through organizations will also be proactive and ameliorate this problem before it spirals completely out of control.
I think that when school pupils come to school at the age of 12, 13 and 14 and are educated on anti-Semitism and xenophobia, the basis for their feelings is there already.
In 2016, we selected projects for funding, and we could gather different experiences from these projects, different ideas for how to make the topic of anti-Semitism more accessible in the classroom and more interesting for teachers and students alike to want to discover. And these projects, the experience we gain from them, has helped us to design a future generation of tools for the educational sector.
First of all, we want kids to understand that this happened here. We want them to recognize the places, the spaces, the landmarks of their own cities that they are passing every day.
We have worked with several organizations, among them Anne Frank House, in developing teaching material to be used in the classroom. And this is actually based on local realities and has been now used in 14 different countries.
It's really important that future generations of teachers learn about these topics. So we decided the gap ODIHR could fill is creating a framework curricula for teacher training institutes so that all new teachers who come out of training have learned about these topics. They cover intolerance, bias, prejudice, and particularly anti-Semitism, so that teachers teaching in a classroom, in a village, in the countryside or in a city are able to make these topics important for the students in their local context where they are growing up and learning about the world.
It's very necessary to listen youngster voices and figure out what is manipulation and what is truth in real life.
Effective education on anti-Semitism really needs to reach people, not only at the intellectual level, but also in their heart.
We are developing a set of teacher aids for practicing teachers where they can get information and ideas on how to create their own lessons that address the topic of anti-Semitism in particular.
I really think that if we had thought about anti-Semitism, the Holocaust and similar stories, had put them in curricula as obligatory part of education 20 years ago, I think that the situation in Europe might have been quite different today. But it's not too late. Let's work for the next generation.
So may I ask Ruth Ann to address us first and then followed by Arthur. Thank you.
Thank you, Kishan. I'm delighted to be here. We're both delighted to be here to showcase the teacher training curriculum to you in the very brief time that we have available. UCL Center for Holocaust Education was extremely honored to have been commissioned by OSCE and ODIHR to develop this much needed initiative. And it's really been great to partner with you in common effort to counter anti-Semitism. It's one of the most important, if not the most important projects that we have worked on at UCL, and it's certainly the most urgent. The new surge of anti-Semitism since the pandemic began underlines this, as been said. But before we begin, we would like to mention our gratitude to the number of international experts who contributed to the consultation process which underpins this curricula. You put us through quite some forensic questioning and testing, which is exactly what we wanted and needed you to do. And the training curriculum, which we are launching today, is extremely nuanced and thorough as a result. This consultation included representation from the Jewish communities and hearing from you, your perspectives and experiences as the curricula was being developed was absolutely vital. We had to keep the content true to the lived experience. So thank you for that. If we can turn to the next slide. So this is the collection of training curricula being published today. You'll see 4 volumes. All the volumes carry a core philosophy, a vision and content, but diversify in approach and resources depending or according to the age phase that the trainees will teach. So we have training curricula for those training to teach primary phase, in the primary phase, the secondary phase, and for vocational training. The 4th training curricula concerns the professional training for school directors. School directors are in a unique position to inculcate values, create ethos that challenge injustice and respects the dignity of all. It is they who can inspire communities, lead by example, and can be a role model both within and outside the school community. They set the tone and can get the buy-in of parents and governors, caretakers, the whole school community. So it's critical to train those too who look to become school directors to address anti-Semitism and understand better how they can use their role to inculcate an ethos resistant to bias, prejudice, and injustice, and be committed to preventing anti-Semitism and confronting it when it appears. So our next slide looks at how we developed a structure of architecture to structure the knowledge that a trainee will need in order to go through this training. And we've divided that knowledge up into 3 domains: a domain of self-knowledge, a domain of content knowledge, and a domain of pedagogic knowledge. And for the school directors, we have changed that to leadership knowledge, that last column. You can see that we've divided those columns into key critical questions that drive the curriculum content from here on. The self-knowledge is looking at, this resonates to the process of reflection, self-reflection of the teacher's tacit and implicit values that they may have, their beliefs, their motivations, and their ability to be aware of these in practice, and in particular, their fears and prejudices. And it's also about getting them to think about who they are as a teacher, the appreciation of a sense of duty to certain key values, and how teachers can be agents of change. In the middle section is content knowledge, and this is all about the subject at hand. It involves all the elements of forms, functions, and consequences of anti-Semitism and their origins. And in particular, it highlights, you'll see there the questions, highlight the importance of the Holocaust being taught. And this is, of course, a hugely challenging subject. It has to be done well, but we feel it's absolutely critical in the content knowledge of a trainee teacher who is looking to challenge anti-Semitism. And of course, in that, the importance of Jewish life before the war is central, and Jewish life after the war. We also see it's important to highlight that Jews are not always to be linked to anti-Semitism, that it's critical to understand about Jewish life today in all its richness and its variety. The third column's looking at pedagogic knowledge. Well, that's all about how a teacher addresses anti-Semitism, how they teach it in planned sessions in their classes. What are the pitfalls? What are the things they should avoid? How best they do it? And also how they might handle incidents which occur without warning. What procedures, what strategies should they employ? And how overall they can build a resilience in students within their classroom to share a mission to address anti-Semitism when it occurs, and perhaps to stand up to anti-Semitism, to have that feeling of agency. Overall, fundamental to all of this is the idea that non-action is not an option. And if there's a temptation to switch off, that cannot be, that action must be taken. So those are the 3 columns. Arthur, if you'd like to take us to the next stage.
So as Ruth Ann has indicated, we've structured the curriculum around these 3 curriculum areas and broken each domain down into a number of questions. But all of those questions, as you will have seen, are themselves rather complex. So at the next level down, each question has been broken down to help teacher trainers make it manageable and communicable to the teachers they're training. And this is merely an example. So topic 4, which is in our content knowledge column, the middle column, is broken down further into a number of sub-questions. So to explore forms, functions, and consequences of anti-Semitism, we propose one needs to think about stereotypical representations of Jewish people, different forms of anti-Semitism, how to recognize anti-Semitism, and a range of other questions. But again, it's not enough just to stipulate questions. We want to start to think about the sorts of outcomes that we'll want training teachers to achieve in order to be able to answer them and therefore take them forward confidently in their classes in order to address these problems practically and effectively. So, as I said, beyond the level of the domains and the key driving questions, we have a further level of breakdown and analysis to make things communicable and accessible for teacher trainers and also for the teachers they are training. But it isn't enough simply to ask lots of questions and identify objectives. We have to provide resources to enable those objectives to be met and those questions to be addressed. So you'll notice if you look at the curriculum documents that they all of them, and there are 4 as Ruthann has said, they're all around about 100 pages, slightly over in one case in particular. And what those pages largely consist of is guides to the content knowledge, because we're mindful that this is all about knowledge. You cannot contest prejudice in a generic way. You need to know about the specifics of it if you're going to be effective in challenging it and recognizing it. So for each of these driving questions, and there are 12 in the standard curricula, slightly more in the one for school directors, for each of the questions, we have elaborated a kind of content guide. And the 4 pages that you can't see, and they're not meant to be visible, they're just as an illustration of the sort of volume that we're providing. Those 4 pages are the ones addressing topic 4, which we've just been looking at. So as well then as breaking things down into a manageable form, we also provide knowledge guides for teachers. But of course, these are vast issues and we wouldn't attempt to try and comprehensively cover them in one document for each phase. So we also provide guides where teachers can find out more. We'll find good examples of things to use. And this is the guide box from the topic 4 section about forms and functions of anti-Semitism. And what we've tried to do is draw on the excellent work that's out there that colleagues have produced in the international community working on these issues. So you'll see that in this page, in this example, we're drawing on materials from Yad Vashem, we're drawing on eyewitnesses materials, for example. So we're trying to provide guides to the excellent material that's out there, but we're also very mindful of the need to try and do that in a multilingual way, because it's not sufficient, of course, just to point to things in English. So on this page alone, and just for example, we can see that the Anne Frank House ODIHR materials on anti-Semitism are highlighted. And as many colleagues will know, those are multilingual. So there are Hungarian versions, for example. But you'll also note that we've made references down the bottom to materials in French, to materials in German, to materials in Italian. So we've tried to do a lot to provide teachers, if you like, with an entree into these topics through our content that we provided, but also with ways in which they can take their learning forward, for example, with these links. Okay, what about practical approaches? So the way we've structured things, and just to echo Ruthann and thank all of the expert groups who gave us guidance on this, we've structured things in 2 ways. On a proactive model, which is on the left-hand side here. So teachers need to be trained in order to plan their curriculum in advance to address the stereotypes and prejudices about Jewish people and other groups, of course, that they will encounter and in the culture of their schools and that their pupils may encounter. So on the left-hand side, we have deliberate practical curriculum planning. But of course, as everyone who's ever been a teacher will know, you can't plan everything, and the real challenges come out of the blue when you're not expecting them. So we've also structured in, as a key part of our approach, critical incident responsive training. How can teacher educators help teachers cope with the curved balls that come at them when they're not expecting it? So the left-hand side is deliberate proactive planning. The right-hand side is reactive critical incident management. We've tried to cover both in our curriculum. I will deal with the first and then hand back to Ruthann. So in terms of deliberative and careful proactive planning, we've tried to articulate some principles by covering various things, the nature of prejudice, for example, that teachers can draw on. And this is merely for instance here, it's not a definitive, neither comprehensive, there's a lot more in the guide. But just to give you a sense of some of the things you'll find, we focused a lot on what cognitive science tells us, but also social psychology as well, about how to combat prejudice and how to deal with it. So for example, one of the things we recommend is the use of counter-stereotypical images. To challenge stereotypes, it's not enough to stand at the front of the class and talk about stereotypes. Your curriculum, your resources, your materials have to practically contest them by deconstructing them through the examples that you give. Also as well, for example, stereotypes are generalizations about huge categories that treat them in very broad brush and simplistic ways. Counter that through the reference to individual cases all the time, showing the complexity of Jewish experience, for example. I'm going to move on because I'm aware we have limited time. But in our curriculum then we have lots of knowledge, breakdown and analysis to make the communication and learning of that manageable, and also strategies. The first one, the deliberate planning. We now come to the second approach, which is I'll introduce and then hand over to Ruth Ann. So we have incorporated a number of scenarios. Ruth Ann.
Yeah, and these this is a strategy that we employ for training teachers to deal to respond effectively to those critical incidents, those unexpected incidents, it's based on scenario-based learning, and we've developed a suite of these for each of the curriculum that we've devised, and we feel that there are effective ways of helping trainee teachers unpack a situation, unravel what's actually going on, and identify and wrestle with and identify whether anti-Semitism is going on, whether anti-Semitic language is being used, whether anti-Semitic motifs reside there, what the sentiment is, and all the multi-layers that sort of are there in incidents that take place. And we want them to examine them, explore them, and discuss them with colleagues. We feel that this enables trainees to bring together, and will enable them to bring together the acquired knowledge of the self, the content, and the pedagogic or the leadership, bring it together and sort of put it to the test, really. So it ceases to become an academic exercise, and through these scenarios becomes more of a real life rehearsal of life experience. So perhaps we'd like to take a look at some of them and give you an illustration. Arthur, do you want to take us through the first one?
Yes, indeed. So as Ruth Ann said, that these are there to help teachers apply and mobilize the three types of knowledge we've sought to develop with them through their teacher training in these materials. So if you look at this as the kind of typical sort of thing a teacher might encounter, we've got a reference to anti-Semitic tropes here, the kind of crafty goal described as a Jew goal. But we've got a situation where the teacher dealing with this must do something, because what this tells you is that at the very least, there's anti-Semitism present in their classes, but how do they respond? What is the appropriate thing to do? And this is actually quite tricky, and all of these are multifaceted and tricky, because there's a number of things to note here. One is the nature of this and the motivation of it. What's happening in the classroom in front of you, and as a teacher, how should you respond? And we want people to reflect on that. So the kind of question one might ask is this something to respond to immediately now? Do we challenge these children now? Or do we think this is an issue that I've got to proactively address through my teaching? Because it's very possible these children don't realize what they're saying. And maybe rather than, let's say, treating this as a disciplinary matter, this is something that should be treated as an educational opportunity. And I've now got to plan into my lessons, let's say, in the next week, or maybe not just mine, maybe I've got to address it with the school director as a whole school issue and do some planning to address this proactively. So I think you can see that this involves the teacher thinking about what their role, thinking about whether there's anti-Semitism here and present and what form it is, and to think about strategies and responses. Is this a pedagogic thing immediately to deal with, or is it something to address through a longer term approach and through some active planning? Another example, and I'll hand over to Ruth Ann for this one.
Yes, so take a look at this one. This one's really quite multi-layered and complex. You see a situation here that is faced by a teacher in training, and the question is, what course of action should the trainee teacher take to address this? And you can see lots of sort of issues coming to the fore. Clearly, we need to understand or help teachers understand what 88 refers to, We have to unpick what is being said by a colleague here, the teacher's actual mentee, relating to Muslims, what's being implied there. And also we have the issue for the trainee teacher themselves in relation to their own position and how they actually will manage upwards to actually present this issue to their senior colleagues. By the way, these scenarios are all based on real life experiences. We may have slightly adapted them, but actually they're based on real life experiences. And this is one that we found as a common one, really, that situations where people walked past graffiti, anti-Semitic graffiti, teachers, school community workers, bus drivers, and what is to be done. And here the teacher is finding, the trainee is finding themselves in a position perhaps that they want to do something. How do they do it? What strategies do they take? How can they do this in a diplomatic way, but in an assertive way? This is a typical example of how we might get a group of trainee teachers working together to try and draw on the knowledge that they have gained through the curriculum and come up with some various options of course of action to determine what is the best course of action in this situation.
Thank you, Ruthann. So just to illustrate quickly, as we've said, that there's a teacher, school director, as well as primary, secondary and vocational level curriculum here. And this is just to illustrate the variation in the scenarios to bring in the complexity that a school director might have to deal with. You've potentially got an external agency if the bus company is not, if the bus driver is not employed by the school, or if the bus driver is employed by the school, we've got an issue with the school and its staff issues more broadly. But there's also relations with the community, interfaith issues, quite a lot going on here. And this is an example to try and address. Now, I'm very mindful we've overshot, so I'm going to wrap up really quickly by saying these scenarios are all accompanied by a set of prompt questions to help teacher trainers help their student teachers think through these scenarios. So for example, is there bias here? What's the nature of the problem? And so on. I think it's now falls for us to stop and thank you all for your attention. So thank you so much, colleagues, and thank you for this opportunity to explain our work.
Thank you.
Well, I'm most grateful to Ruthann and Arthur for this really fascinating exploration of the materials, the material itself, reminding us how rigorous, extensive the process of putting them together, of constructing them was. They're shaped by lived experience of Jewish people, and how teacher trainers can engage with, can work with the material, how the material was constructed. And it's been really very useful to just hear some of this, because of course the materials are extensive, vast, and we don't have time to go through all of them, of course, but just that insight has been really very, very useful indeed. So thank you both very, very much. Now we still have, and I'll beg everyone's indulgence, 5 or 6 minutes for to pose a couple of questions to the two of you. The question we've received from one of the participants, Luciano Perotti, is about how to teach about the genocide, contemporary genocide, genocide as a phenomenon, how to teach about genocide. Of course, this links to the experience of the Holocaust, but I wonder, Arthur or Ruthann, one of two of you would like to just address that from your perspective.
Ruthann, would you like to come in? You need to unmute.
Yes, Ruthann, need to unmute. Ruthann, we can't hear you. Just if you can unmute yourself. Great, thank you.
Apologies. It's a very big question. and probably we don't have too much time. I think it's very important for young people to have sound, accurate knowledge of the particular genocides that are being studied. And that takes a lot of work and a lot of training on behalf of the teacher. It's critically important that an authentic understanding is presented to young people. And that's good knowledge, sound knowledge, and critically the human story, because when it comes to genocide, we're talking about mass murder. Mass murder is numbers, huge numbers. And what is crucially important is to maintain the human story within it. And not just the victims of this crime, but the perpetrators of the crime as well. And so that are a couple of important points. And the other thing I would mention is that sometimes teachers are very nervous about teaching about horrific traumatic material, and that is true. And it has to be handled with care and sensitivity. But at the same time, I think young people do have a right, and they have a right to understanding about genocide. They have a right to understanding about the Holocaust. And we have to, it is incumbent upon us teachers to find the right way, the sensitive way to approach it without shielding them from the reality. And if we can't do that, we can't teach about genocide. We can't sugarcoat. We have to respect our young people and respect the history and have courage. I think, unless Arthur would like to pick up, I'm not sure. Hope that's enough.
Great.
Arthur, anything you want to add to Ruth Ann's comments?
Just to say that it's very possible to do it in a sensitive and appropriate way through personalization, but also in a way that doesn't avoid, the nub of this horrific issue. And it's vitally important that we do it, of course, as well.
Thank you for both of you for those responses. I'll just ask a question, if I may, as the moderator, take advantage of my position to say, I note the domains of knowledge, including self-knowledge. So what would you say, how would you say that the material help a teacher and a trainer of a teacher, but a teacher that is self-aware and self-aware enough to be concerned that when teaching about anti-Semitism to children, he or she does not reproduce anti-Semitic stereotypes or even reinforce anti-Semitic beliefs? How do the materials help a teacher to deal with that? Because that is a concern, and rightly so.
If I could come in on that, I mean, I think that the way we would frame self-knowledge is to do with awareness of one's own prejudices, awareness though of one's professional self and the obligations and duties that come with it, and also a knowledge of the context one's in, because you have to have a realistic sense of what's possible and strategic sense of how to act. So I would call those the self-knowledge issues. But I think we would probably help the teacher there with the specific point you've raised through the content knowledge column. And I would like to say, of course, that it's not just us who will be doing that. The initial policy guide has some superb material there on identifying tropes and contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. And so do the superb materials that SEGI have produced under the Words in Action framework. So I think a teacher who's worried about, as it were, getting it wrong is helped by what we do, because we try and provide guidance on what it means to get it right and educate people about these issues, but also the other excellent materials in the project. So I would regard that as a knowledge issue, and I think we do our best to provide, information on contemporary forms of anti-Semitism, tropes, and so on.
And if I can just very briefly say, I would, concur with Arthur on that. It is partly about self-awareness and being aware of where you're coming from, how you present something, and the choices you make, and just bearing in mind at all times, that we all come with our own biases. And yet there is a responsibility as me as a teacher to ensure that I am aware of that and always thinking through, have I made that presentation of that community, of that individual fair? Have I made it in a balanced way? But I agree as well with the content element as well. You will remember perhaps I mentioned that, you know, it's important to talk about the forms, the representations and the incarnations of anti-Semitism. And obviously that's going to involve drawing on anti-Semitic tropes and images and caricatures and things that they may recognize and see. But that cannot remain like that. You've got to also complement that with rich and vibrant, colorful awareness of Jewish people and who they are and their lives, their ordinary lives, but their very real lives, and counterbalance that. So we can't be pushing too much about anti-Semitism and its manifestations. We also have to include, you know, the vibrancy and the reality of Jewish life and Jewish people.
No, thank you very much to both of you for those very important comments. And I take particularly, Ruth Ann, your comment about the wider point about Jewish life, Jewish contribution, which could be overlooked by just focusing, important as it is on anti-Semitism, to look at the bigger picture, which is, of course, one that is deeply inspiring to everyone, Jewish or otherwise. So I think that's really good to end on that positive note. But to thank you, to thank Arthur, to thank everyone who's contributed as a panelist, as a speaker, to Ambassador Kuchler, to Assistant Director General Giannini for the recorded messages, for making this, and to Stephen, of course, to moderating the first panel discussion, and to Katarzyna Garabkadze for opening this event, for making this event hugely insightful, but also with the practical dimension of what these curricula are trying to do, explained so neatly and so carefully to us. So there's a great deal to think about, a great deal of work to pursue. One of the people featured in the short video clip that accompanied this final section, or introduced this final section of the program, said that if these materials were around a generation ago, well, maybe the situation today in the OSCE region, in Europe, around the world, would look very, very different. We can only now hope that by implementing this material, by training a new generation of teachers and school directors, and ultimately children, that we can make a decisive contribution to addressing the scourge of anti-Semitism in this generation and moving forward in the years ahead. There are no doubt questions in your mind. We have one in the chat box as to how this material will now be cascaded down to the institutions, educational institutions themselves, to the schools themselves. So ODIHR will continue in collaboration with UNESCO to raise awareness of the framework curricula at a series of events online and in due course offline, in person. We may have forgotten what they were like, but they will be coming back, I can assure you, or at least there's aspiration to do that as soon as conditions make that possible. So the curricula will be promoted, and do follow then the relevant websites and social media pages of the two institutions involved. And of course, you can also explore what teacher training institutions in your area offer in this regard. So do have a look out. And also the question around, well, will the curricula be translated into additional languages beyond English? The answer is yes, this is our aspiration. We will take forward this during the course of the Words into Action second phase project. And so there's a lot to come your way in the coming weeks and months in terms of the material and translations in due course of the material into a range of languages. So I've offered thanks to the contributors. I wish to offer thanks to all of you who've tuned in, who've stayed beyond. I look at the number of participants, 143, which is pretty impressive at this time of the evening in Central Europe, but of course it'll be much earlier in other time zones. The day has begun, so enjoy the rest of your day. To the colleagues and friends joining us in the afternoon, in the evening, good evening and good night. But before I conclude, I do want to thank the Words into Action team, the project team, who've really worked incredibly hard with their UNESCO colleagues to put on this event. And I will not spare their blushes. I will cite two individuals, two dear colleagues of mine, Tommy Shakedziev and Delia Nita of the Words into Action project team, who have labored very hard. So much appreciation to Delia, to Tommy, for your kind efforts during the course, not just of this afternoon, but for weeks and weeks and weeks preceding it. So thank you all very much for being with us this evening, and stay safe and keep well. And we will look forward to seeing, we hope, all of you again soon, online and in due course offline. Thank you for your support. Good night. Goodbye.